Serving time in federal prison can be really difficult for both the person serving the sentence and also for the family members of the people serving the sentence. Why? Well, it's because they get so many mixed messages. They get messages from case managers, from people serving time, from the lawyer, from all kinds of people. And a lot of times those messages don't really respond to questions. And I want to give an example of the type of information and the type of questions we receive from members of our community who are in prison. And I want to just respond to it in kind of a conversational way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read the question so that you, hopefully before you go into prison, you are getting a better idea of what it's like in there and the confusion and the frustration. Because the more you know about this experience of going through federal prison, the better you are going to be to self-advocate. And all of this is really about self-advocacy. A lawyer can't help you. I can't do the work for you. What I can do is show you the pathway to make things happen. So let's go ahead and scroll down this article, and I've taken a little liberty to edit it just to make it easier for me to read, but it's going to capture the essence of the message I received from somebody in prison. So, people who surrender to federal prison need insight into how the system operates. The more they understand, the better prepared they become to advocate for themselves. We received the following letter from a person who serves an 18-month sentence in a federal prison camp. We would like to offer some insight and commentary with hopes that it will help him and others. So, I always read these articles, these letters and so on, because I know that some people are getting our information on tablets like this one right here. They're inside of federal prisons and they get access to tablets like these. And we have opportunities to provide learning content and so on for them. And then there are people outside who are listening to this information on iTunes or watching it on YouTube while they're exercising or something along those lines. So it's just easier to provide both the audio format and the written format. If you want to get it yourself online, just visit us at prisonprofessors.com and search for our blog and you can get the information. But let me continue reading now. This is about really release dates. His questions concern release dates and computation factors and really interactions with the unit team. So I want to comment on all of those subjects, but let's just read through the letter and then I'll provide the commentary. Today I had a discussion with my case manager. Our conversation involved two issues. One, I needed assistance with filing a BP-10. The BP-10 is an intermediate stage of the administrative remedy process. To learn more about the administrative remedy process, see this link. Now, you can't see the link, obviously, if you're listening to this on iTunes, but when I publish this article in this website here, I will provide a link to the entire administrative remedy process. For now, I'd just like to take a moment to kind of explain what it is. So, under the Prison Litigation Reform Act that passed around 1991 or something like that, really at the start of my sentence, it made things much more difficult for people in federal prison to express grievances. A lot of times the Bureau of Prisons will act in a manner that people serving time feel violates their constitutional rights or violates their due process. So what they would like to do is go right to the district court and file a motion asking a federal judge to intervene. But to give you just like the dumbed down version of the Prison Litigation Reform Act, Congress responded to the judge's request of this thing called frivolous lawsuits, and they passed the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which means before anybody can file something in federal court, a grievance against the system, that person must first exhaust administrative remedies. Judges will say, I'm not here to run the prison system. The prison system is to run the prison system, and they have a process, and anybody has to go through that process, giving the prison system an opportunity to respond to the grievance before it gets to a federal judge. So that's what the PLRA, that's why it requires you to go through administrative remedy. And that administrative remedy process includes a series of escalating complaints. First, it starts with a counselor with an informal resolution, and then a BP-9, which goes to the warden, and then a BP-10, which is an intermediate stage that goes to the region, and then a BP-11, which goes to Washington, D.C. And after somebody's exhausted that, then the person can go to court. This individual is right now wanting to pursue a BP-10. He said, I needed help filing the BP-10, and the case manager replied, all you have to do is put it in the mail. Okay, so it's a rather simple form, and you're supposed to fill out the form and submit it in the mail, but you've got to maintain copies so for appellate reasons, because if you appeal, you've got to send the same thing to the next person that you sent to the previous person. And so it's important to keep 3 copies of every one of those forms, which can be tedious. And the person who wrote me thought or stated that the case manager is supposed to make copies that can accompany these intermediate proceedings, but that's not really accurate. There's nowhere in the administrative policy that will state the case manager has to make copies. Some case managers may make copies. Some case managers may say, no, make your own copies. And that if there's no copy machine, the person has to do is handwrite the copy. Many times I had to litigate administrative remedy processes, and I would just have to simply handwrite what I wrote on the BP-9 on 2 or 3 other pieces of paper and keep it in a file really well organized so that when I went to the next stage, I could submit a copy. This is what I submitted. That I had to do many times when I was writing these administrative remedies from segregated housing units. If you're on the compound, sometimes there is a copy machine in the library, but I mean, my experience was 50% of the time, at least, the copy machine was broken. So you couldn't access it, or you had to buy tokens, which meant you had to wait until the commissary was open so that you could buy tokens to use the copy machine. And all this time, there's a ticking time bomb, because there are time limits where you have like 20 days to file these things. So if your commissary is closed and you don't have tokens, these are the types of administrative hurdles that exist for people in prison, which means a person has to be working pretty hard to advocate for himself. He's got to be willing sometimes to write those extra copies. Now, in this case, the person says that as the case manager made the copies for him, and so, he believes in prison, case managers are not, this is where I write, case managers are not obligated to make copies. Some will provide copies, some will not, but either way, you've got to make the copies. So I just wanted to address that first question, I guess, or statement that he made. I think it's important for anybody to understand, how does the prison system operate? The more I understand how it operates, the less frustrated I become when I look at all of these bureaucratic hurdles that the system puts in place. And there are going to be a lot. There are going to be bureaucratic hurdles all the way through the journey. Once you get sentenced, and remember, the judge imposes a sentence. Once that judge imposes a sentence, it's up to the individual to advocate for himself. And that doesn't stop in prison. It's going to continue when the person gets to a halfway house or home confinement, and then continue again when the person is on supervised release and trying to get a higher level of liberty, and then get early termination of supervised release. So every decision along the way has collateral consequences that come into play much later down the line. So you've got to be thinking about this all the time. So that addresses his first concern about administrative remedy and what is the case manager's obligation. Well, then he says, I asked the case manager to review me for the Second Chance Act. And this was really important to him. So I want to spend a little bit of time going over that. And I want to spend a bit of time creating a supplementary resource, which I will do, so to kind of explain the different prison reform movements, including the Second Chance Act, the First Step Act, the CARES Act, and all of these different prison reform legislations that can be really confusing. So the case manager told me that administrators had already reviewed me for the Second Chance Act. I asked who reviewed me and when. Well, the case manager told me that Grand Prairie reviewed me. Administrators in Grand Prairie reviewed any person, the case manager said, who served a sentence of 18 months or less. The case manager said that my computation sheet showed a home confinement eligibility date of May 27th, 2023. Now, the good news, just a little bit of commentary here, the good news on that is we're not talking about an insurmountable amount of time. I mean, that's not to diminish the difficulty for a family member and for an individual in prison to say, wait a minute, May 27th, 2023, we're filming this in October of 22. So you're talking October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. That's 7 more months, 30 days. That's 210 days until that period of time. So it's a long time, but we can get through that time. And we could use this time to be thinking about, okay, what strategies and steps can I take during this time to position myself for an easier transition when I go to the next stage of the journey, which is going to be on home confinement or the halfway house. So I want to just kind of seed and pepper this right there, that we're talking about 200 days, and that's the home confinement eligibility date. And I'm going to give a little bit more of that in a moment. I asked the case manager why the unit team would only recommend 90 to 120 days of halfway house, or in the alternative, 56 days of home confinement. The case manager told me that Grand Prairie made that decision. All right, let's talk about that. He says, I know for a fact that the case manager is the one who sends the halfway house recommendation. And I know this because my case manager told me. He says, the case manager will not provide an answer on why the unit team only recommended 120 days of the halfway house. Again, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time going over the rules of the Second Chance Act. So as I'm continuing to read here, he says, I know for a fact that the case manager is the one who sends the halfway house recommendation. I know this because my case manager told me. I'm going to address that in just a moment. The case manager will not provide an answer on why the unit team only recommended 120 days of halfway house. I also asked about the recalculation dates. I wanted to know who could, didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. I also asked about the recalculation. I wanted to know who could I contact to request a recalculation in response to my BP9. Apparently the warden said that he had to wait for a recalculation, but I don't know who will contact me or who I can contact. Understandable. There's a lot of this confusion because, well, we'll get into why there's confusion. The case manager said, I have no idea how Grand Prairie recalculates sentence computation. It's like throwing a dart at a dartboard. And the case manager then followed up with kind of a flip remark saying you would be better off committing a bigger crime to get a larger sentence to reap the benefits of the First Step Act and the Second Chance Act. I then said to him, well, I'd say that's as prejudiced as it gets. And he said, yes, it is. The case manager should be advocating for me. Instead, it seems as if the case manager does whatever he has to do to keep me in custody for as long as possible. I'm just a number that nets the BOP $186 a day. And that concludes kind of the letter that this person sent us from a federal prison. And I want to respond to what the Second Chance Act is. The Second Chance Act is a piece of prison reform legislation that passed during the second President Bush, I think it was Bush 43's administration. It was passed in 2008. And the Second Chance Act provides some very specific language that authorizes the Bureau of Prison to recommend up to 1 year of time that the person can serve in what's called a residential reentry center, the halfway house, okay? Of that 1 year, the person can serve the last 10% of the sentence on home confinement. That's the law, okay? That's just the law. The case manager does not have discretion on how to change that law. That's the maximum. So in theory, the Bureau of Prisons could send this person to a halfway house for 12 months. And the person understandably wants to know, well, why did you only recommend me for 120 days? Or 90 to 120 days? And why did you only give me a choice of 56 days in home confinement or 120 days in a halfway house? And the prudent decision is, in my view, get out of prison as soon as you can. So because he can only serve a maximum of 10% under the Second Chance Act in a home confinement, that would imply that the person had a sentence of somewhere along the lines of 18 months. So 18 months, 10% of 18 months is like 1.8 months, which apparently in the BOP's calculation is 56 days, right? 2 months would be 60 days, 1.8 or 61 days, 1.8 apparently is like 56 days. That's the maximum by law under the Second Chance Act that a person can go to home confinement. Now remember, I said under the Second Chance Act. That's not the only act, okay? And the 12 months is what they can do, but they have guidelines. They have guidelines of issuing halfway house time in accordance with a sentence length. So a person with a short sentence, and I know it's not short to you, 18 months, because you're away from your family and you don't belong in prison anyway. So any time in there is unjust. But it's not for you or for me to assess how much time the Bureau is going to give in halfway house time. It's up to the Bureau of Prisons. That's who Congress gave the discretion to. So they have the discretion under the Second Chance Act. Our job is to create a great release plan to avoid disciplinary infractions in prison, to participate in classes, to participate in the financial responsibility program, and to advocate for myself. But on an 18-month sentence, there are going to be guidelines. When I was in prison, the guidelines on an 18-month sentence would probably be about 2 months halfway house. So right now, they're recommending this person for 90 to 120 days. I know he'd like to get a year. And in my view, he should get a year. But there's a problem. They don't have enough halfway houses. They don't have enough case managers. And so there's going to be who is the best candidate to get the highest level. How is that person going to advocate for himself? Well, that's what we kind of try and teach people how to do with it from the day they get to prison. And I happen to know from earlier correspondence that this person wrote that he's done an amazing job. He's gotten a job. He's tutored. He's gotten 2 jobs. He's stayed busy. He's done everything he can. But understandably, he's frustrated because he wants more than 120 days. Sometimes you've got to say, okay, maybe I'm not going to get more than 120 days. He wants to know what is the process to try and get more? It would be an administrative remedy. What's my view on that? I don't think he's going to win on that because it's within their discretion. They have the right to do what they want to do. It's like saying, I'm ticked off at my lawyer for not doing a better job and getting me a 1-year sentence. Well, nobody can change that. That's what the judge imposed. Maybe it should have been handled. There should have never been a criminal case brought. Maybe it should have been a civil case. I don't know about that. What I do know is that this is not going to be the last obstacle this person's going to face. And the more he understands about this system, the better he's going to be able to create a pathway that will help him. And now I'm going to write him a letter today, and I'm going to write a letter to his wife, including his wife, to try and explain this process to them. But I'm not going to mislead this person and suggest there's an easier path to get out. The only path under Second Chance Act, remember, is are they within these parameters? And if they've recommended 90 to 120 days, they are within the parameters. With regard to who's going to recalculate his projected release date, it will be Grand Prairie. That is the administrators in Grand Prairie. They are the ones that have the task of doing this, and it's a massive bureaucracy. So they are looking at this person as a number, and they're looking at a number of factors, including the pre-sentence investigation report, the judgment order, the statement of reasons that the judge imposed, and that's who they feel is their obligations to. This person believes that the case manager is there to advocate for the person, but that's just a misunderstanding of the system. That's not how the case manager sees his role, nor is that how the case manager will advance his career. Nobody is going to say, oh, is the case manager advocating for prisoners? The answer is no. The case manager is there for the prison system, and the prison system, well, it's changing, it's getting better, but historically, it's only been serving the institution, not the individual. My job is to help people understand, hey, how do you succeed anyway, even when there are complications in prison? That's what I learned how to do while going through 26 years. And that's all I can help somebody else understand, that this is a process. We've got to go through this process and we've got to advocate ourselves. But in my view, filing the BP-10 under the Second Chance Act is the wrong view. That's the wrong prison reform legislation act to be advocating for. The First Step Act, on the other hand, is fundamentally different. The First Step Act provides by Congress that a person can earn earned time credits. And it's those earned time credits that could and should result in lessening the sentence length. Because Congress has said we want to incentivize people to participate in classes. And if they've earned these credits, they should get time off of their sentence up to 1 year. That's a big plus. The problem is the BOP doesn't calculate it right, and that's going to take a lot of litigation and advocacy work. In my view, it's going to take several years to push the BOP in a direction where they are granting those earned time credits all the way through until the person completes his sentence. The BOP is not doing that right now. And because the BOP is not doing that right now, if somebody wants to litigate, that's what the person should be litigating, not the Second Chance Act, the First Step Act. But the person has to understand the propensity to win, the likelihood of winning. What has to happen? First, because of the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which I discussed at the top of this video, the person first has to go through administrative remedy, BP-8, BP-9, BP-10, BP-11. Then the person would have to file in federal court under a motion called a 2241 that is a habeas corpus petition stating that the institution is not applying the law correctly. And a federal judge would have to agree. And the federal judge would have to then say that order the Bureau of Prisons to apply those First Step Act credits every month, because that's what Congress said the law is. I'd love to say the BOP is going to do what Congress says all the time, but it's a big bureaucracy and it frequently takes a big fight. We are going to make that fight. I would love to say you could make that fight to this young man who's in prison that only has 7 months to go, but in all likelihood, he would be home before this case ever went to federal court. So it's a very difficult pill to swallow. What we should be thinking about is, what can I do to position myself for the highest level of liberty once I get out? What could I position myself to do to get early termination of supervised release? Because the decisions that you're making today, there's only so much time that you have. And you have to decide, how am I going to deploy my resources? Am I going to deploy my resources trying to fight a battle that I can't win? Because it's like saying, I'm going to boycott this movie. I'm going to buy a ticket, but I won't go into the movie theater. I mean, what did you win? You spent the money to buy the ticket, so you said you won't go in. Does the movie theater really care? It's like, filing a motion that's not going to have a possibility of changing your life in a good way. It's not, in my decision, the right decision. But that's my position. That might not be your position. Every individual has to define success and then try to solve for that success. That's the key to making it through a journey in federal prison, as I learned it while going through 26 years in prison. It may not be the key for you. For some people, there is an art and to going through what's called therapeutic litigation. I just have to have something in court, because then I feel better about myself. But there are costs to that. The more I file in court, the less likely I'm going to have a judge take me seriously when I'm going to ask him for early termination, or the less like success I'm going to have if I have a real issue that I could potentially win because I'm going to be looked at somebody as a paper pusher, a litigator, a jailhouse lawyer. Those are not the types of things that actually lead to victory in prison. So he wants answers to his questions. I'm going to give those answers truthfully. I'm not going to lie to anybody. And I can tell you, it's an uphill battle. As Mick Jagger, was it Mick Jagger? No, it was AC/DC who said it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. It's a long way to the top if you want to get the best outcome in the Bureau of Prisons. And I want to do my best to help people get the best outcome. But you've got to use those processes. You got to know where those levers are, and you got to know what happens when I pull lever. As soon as I pull one lever, another lever goes up. So let's think these things through and make prudent decisions along the way. I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors. I know that I wish I could change the past for you. I wish I could be the judge to take that sentence away. I can't. I had to go through it. Sometimes we're going to have to go through it. But only thing I can promise you is I would never ask anybody to do anything I didn't do. And I hope that you find this information helpful. I'm Michael Santos. On behalf of our entire team at Prison Professors, I believe in you. Thanks.